for my own spiritual growth. I find that I spend all my time preparing for Shir to teach my classes, and I don't find that I'm able to put any effort into my own spiritual growth, into my own learning. What should I do? So Rav Kalevsky said over, Rav Ruderman said over, from the Balaflo. The Balaflo writes in his Akdama that it says, Im doima rabba kemalach Hashem tzvakos, if your Rebbe is like a malach, oz tilmei ter oz yuvakesh Torah mipiu, then you should want to learn from him. What does that mean if your Rebbe is like a malach? A malach has only one job at a time, and that's all he does. A Rebbe has to be like a malach. Yes, everything you have, you should be putting into teaching, and even if that means you can't work on your own spiritual growth, don't worry about that. Hashem will take care of that. But your sentiment is perfect, because that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it. Suppose say, I'll call Yisrael. Today's also the yard site from Gedalia Shore, who was Rosh Hashiva and Tarvadas in my father's days. Was a very friendly, nice Rav, but he was a genius. I believe that the Lubliner Rav, who was the creator of Daf Yomi, Meir Shapiro, said about him that he's never seen such a brilliant mind before, and he wrote beautiful Torahs. He was a very friendly guy. My father used to tell me that when he was in yeshiva, Gedalia would walk over to him, put his hand around my father's shoulder, says, it's really, how you doing? Give a cigarette. Because he used to always bump cigarettes off the bucket. He used to smoke a lot. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. So if I'm not mistaken, we are up to, yesterday we learned Aflam and Tess, right? So yesterday we learned about whether or not the Eved needs a star shichrer after he gets their mafkrim. We had a machalikas about that. We discussed the question of if someone is a makdish as Eved, does that mean to make him kodesh or does that mean to make him free? We had that shaila. And then we had the machalikas Abishol and the Tanakama as to whether or not a katan could be zoichen himself. So if a ger died and left over in his estate, avodim, the adult avodim are kodesh themselves, they seize themselves immediately. But the katanim, whether or not they can seize themselves, is totally the machlokas Abishol and the Rabbanon. And then we had a discussion if we pass like Abishol, and we had two versions of Rabbi Shua ben Levi as to whether or not we pass like Abishol or like Rabbanon. And then we had the Shita of Reb Shimon, who said that you could only free an Eved with a star shichur, Kesef doesn't work, and the Gemara came out all the way to end, going back and forth, that ain't halacha Reb Shimon, right? The Gemara even had a steer where Reb Nachman held, and then the Gemara said over the story about Reb Nachman with an Amma who wanted her Adam to free her. She was crying, so her Adam threw her his hat and said, "Kaina my hat and kaina yourself." Reb Nachman said it doesn't work, and it was misunderstood why Reb Nachman said that. The reason for it, we thought the reason was because he was possibly like Reb Shimon, and that just through a regular kinyan you can't fear Neved, you need a star shichur. But at the end of the day, it's because the kinyan was not done properly. Because when you do a kinyan chalipin, the koina has to give an object to the makna. The makna gets something, he gets the shmata, and through him getting that shmata, he gives back what he wanted to transmit. That happens to be a machlokes. Tosfos quotes the pasuk in Boaz, when Boaz was buying the rights to marry Rus from the other goyel. It also talks about passing an object, and Rashi right there on Megillas Rus says it's a machlokes who passed who the object, because as our Gemara states, there's a shaila: is it the keli of the makna or is it the keli of the koina? We paskin that it's the keli of the koina, but there is such a shaila if it's supposed to be the keli of the makna. Well, the keli of the koina makes more sense because you're giving me something, and in return, yeah, I mean, it's a magical key, I guess. But I don't know. Amar Abzera, Amar Chadina, Amar Abashi, Omar Rebbe. Eved shenosa es bas chorin b'fnei rabbi. You go to a chasana, and there's an Eved, or someone who, up until this point, we assumed was an Eved, is marrying a bas chorin, is marrying a bas Yisrael, and you know got a bracha under the chuppah? The Adon. The Adon got a bracha under the chuppah. So the halacha jata l'cheres, that automatically means that the Eved is free. Why is that? Dr. Rashi, the loy shacharei, the lav the shacharei, will have a shavak le'amintav bas chorin. When the priest asks if anybody has something to say, please speak now. There's a nusach that the priest says. Yeah. Exactly. If anybody has a reason to protest this marriage, please speak up. Right? I think that's what they say. So that was the point where the Adon should have spoken up. Hold your. That's right. Exactly. So here, this was the time for the Adon to say, "Hey, you can't be getting married. You're my Eved. You can't marry Bas Yisrael." And the fact that I didn't protest proves that he must have had already freedom. Not that this was an act of freeing him. He must have freed him before, and we just didn't know about it. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "Kol kach yesh biyatcha." You telling me you have such a sack to such an extent from Rebbe? I actually will show you a brayta that says exactly the opposite. Vanisha, I learned. What if he himself gives a star? We know you could be mekadesh a woman with a star, and he gave her a star that says Harayat Mukudeshesly. Rabbi Meir Aimim Mukudeshes. But Vachachamim Aimim, who Rabbi Yochanan is focusing on, Eino Mikudeshes. She's not Mikudeshes. So how could you say when he stands by a wedding of his Eved, it's assumed that he freed his Eved, even if he is party to the wedding? Even if he was the man who was Mekadesh this woman, we state that she's not Mekudeshes, meaning that obviously she's still a Shivcha. Zok to Gemara, there's a very big difference. This we're going to see in just a moment, but Hachanami, the case where we quoted from Rebbe that if an Adon is by the wedding of his Eved and plays along, that is a raya, that he freed him, unlike the case that Rabbi Yochanan quoted with his machlokes. Because that case is Kisher Rabbi Heisiya Isha. You know who was the Shatchin? You know who arranged the whole wedding? His Adon. Dr. Rashi, Heisiya Isha, the Lav the Shacharei, if the Adon didn't free the Eved, will have him an Eved Yisrael Yadon. He wouldn't cause an Isra to be done. So now it's a question of Isra V'heter. Would he cause his Eved to be over an Isra? The fact that he's involved shows it must be mutter, meaning this Eved must be a Ben Yisrael, he must be free. Umi ikamidi. So now if the Gemara, I don't understand. If he's merely involved in the wedding, you're saying it's a raya free to Eved, but if he made the Kedushin, it's worse. Umi ikamidi. He won't allow his Eved to do an Isser, and therefore from the fact he's participating in the wedding, it's proof positive that he freed the Eved, but V'yu Aved Yisura. Yet, when he himself gives this woman Kedushin, you're going to suggest that he's going to do an Isser and she's not really married? How do you get that logic? There's a big difference. The in the case where there's a machlokes between Rav Meir and the Chachamim, yes, he planned to free her. Actually, when he gave her the star, he said this star should have a dual purpose. A, it should be your star shecher, and B, it should also be your star kedushin. So Zokt Rashi, fascinating. Kloimar, either Amar Iskachi by Greda, if all the star said Harayat Nekudeshesli, Vada Shechra Mekar, that would be better, because that tells us that for sure sometime in the past he must have already freed her, and that's why he's able to marry her now. Now he thinks he's freeing her, he wants to free her, and he's using the same instrument to do both. That proves to us clearly he couldn't have freed her up until this point, because you see he's trying to free her now. And the question is, does this work? Rab Meir Sabar Yesh Beloshin. Rab Meir Sabar Yesh Beloshin Azel Loshin Shecher. Rab Meir holds Mekudeshes. You know why? Because when you write both in the star. If you make a dual purpose star that will act both for Shichur and for Kedushin, it works. For Rabban Sover, Ein B'Loshen Zeloshen Shichur. A dual star doesn't work. And therefore, since it says Haret Mukadeshly, it's a star Kedushin, it's not a star Shichur, and you cannot marry a woman who's not Jewish. So at the end of the day, everybody agrees that the Adon merely participating in a wedding is proof positive that this wedding is legit, and there must have already been a Shichur. But here in this case, the Adon is clearly showing that he's trying to effect the Shichur now with this instrument. The Machlokes merely is, does that work or does it not work? Beautiful. Amr Shubin Levi. Eved sheniach tefillin b'fnei rabbi. An Eved who wears tefillin in front of his Adon. And Rashi says, Ein derech Eved noniach tefillin. It's not the norm for an Eved to wear tefillin. The mitzvahs say, Shazman grami. The Laila loves man tefillin. So the halacha is yotza lecheres, because again, the fact that the Adon is there witnessing his Eved doing a mitzvah that he's not supposed to be doing proves that he's not an Eved. Meishefek Gemara, Lava heimenu rabbi. What if the Adon borrows money from his Eved? Oisha asai rabbi apotropos, or his Adon made him into an apotropos. He made him the power of attorney to control his estate, as Rashi says, the lav de shachere lehav a. If this wasn't a free man, he wouldn't have given him the prestige of running his estates. Rashi doesn't comment on loving many rabbi, but if you're borrowing money from him, that means you're acknowledging that he has his own money. That's also an acknowledgement that this Eved is free. Or if this Eved wore tefillin in the presence of his Adon, that's proof as well that this Eved is free. Or if he got an aliyah, this is not a good raya that he's free. So, Frank the Gemara, how could Rabbi Shua ben Levi say that an Eved sheniach tefillin b'fnei rabbi yotza lecheres, where we have a brisa that says black and white, that it's not a good proof? Amar Rabba bar Rav Shila, kisher Rabbi heniach tefillin. When did Rabbi Shua ben Levi say that an Eved wearing tefillin in front of his Adon is free? That's when the Adon put it on for him. That's clearly an expression that I consider you to be a free person. Just being in shul and the Eved wore tefillin doesn't mean anything, because there's no reason why the Adon is expected to protest that. And therefore, it's not a raya that he freed him. Now, Tosfos delves in very, very clearly how this Rabbi heniach tefillin. Now, earlier in the Gemara, we had this concept of a person who wouldn't make his Eved do an Aveira, right? The Gemara says earlier that if a Adon is involved in marrying off the Eved to a Bas Yisrael, it's proved that he must have freed his Eved, because he wouldn't have made his Eved do an Aveira. As the Gemara uses, he wouldn't impose on Aveira on the Eved, and that's the proof, in fact, that this Eved must have been freed. Zok Tosfos, that's not what the argument is over here. Because don't say the argument is, if the Adon put him on tefillin, and now it's going to cause him to make a bracha on the tefillin that he's not mechuyev to, so it's a bracha levatala. Zok Tosfos, that's not the raya, because it's not a bracha levatala, even though he's not mechuyev in the mitzvah, as we see in Tosfos. Don't think it's because the Adon would never cause the Eved to do an iser by having him make a bracha on tefillin that he's not mitzvah in. The mavarich aleya and the bracha levatala. That's not a concern, because I'll prove to you, Zok Tosfos, that even if you're not mitzvah b'oisa and you make a bracha, it's perfectly fine. The sukkah, lulav, the shofar, the common mitzvahs say shanashim avarchos. There's many mitzvahs that the women do make a bracha on, even though they're not mitzvah b'oisa. So that's not the concern here. So if that's not the concern, just because the Adon is putting tefillin on the Eved, how does that show that the Eved is a free man? It's because they normally don't wear tefillin. It's unusual that they should wear tefillin. He would never be putting tefillin on his Eved unless he already freed him, which is exactly what Rashi says. So it's a simple concept. It's a simple proof that it doesn't happen. It's so unusual that it must be that the Adon freed his Eved. No, it's possible for someone to give an Eved money al manashe ein l'rabbi rishus by, Right? That's what we discussed yesterday. If an Eved postponed himself, so it's all possible. So therefore, I guess those aren't 100% clear expressions of freedom, but wearing tefillin is clearly an expression of freedom. Eved sheiniach tefillin b'fnei rabbi. An Eved who put on tefillin in front of his Rebbe, we explained that means where the Rebbe put it on, where the Adon put it on for him. Yotze l'cheres. Meisvei. Lava heimenu rabbi. Oisha asa. Oh, I'm sorry. I just learned this Gemara. He also Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. When Rav Dimi came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Misha Omar. So just I want to focus in because this is going to come back into play. This is Rav Dimi saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Misha Omar v'shash misasai. Somebody was dying, and he said at the time of his death, Haloinus shivchasi. This woman who is currently my shivcha, al yishtabdu ba la'achar moisi. I don't want her to be a treated as a maidservant after I die. So the halacha is kaifin as a yorshim. He didn't free her. He just said, I don't want her to work. So that's like instructing his children in the will to free her when they yarshim her. Therefore, kaifin as a yorshim, you are forced the next of kin. The kaifin law getchich, and they have to write for her a getchich. Amru lefanav, Rab Ami v'Rab Asi. Rab Ami and Rab Asi attacked Rav Dimi's quote from Rabbi Yochanan, and they said, Rebbe, I'ata moida shebaneh avodim. I don't understand. Just because I don't want her to work, that doesn't mean I want her to be free. I want her to have an easy job. Let her not work anymore. But maybe she should still retain the status of a shivcha, so that if she has children, those children will now be avodim. So how could you say that by him saying al yishtabdu bala'achar moisi, that means he wants his children to free this Eved? Adarabba. All he meant is he doesn't want her to work. Let her retire. But not that she should lose her status of a shivcha. To the contrary, he wants her to continue having children where those children will still be avodim. So how could you make an argument that they have to free her? So they argued, Rab Ami Rab Asi argued in Rav Dimi and said, no way Rabbi Yochanan said that. It's impossible because that's not what it would have meant. Zokt Rashi, all it means is I want her to retire. But should she have children, from here and on, they still have a status of avodim. And therefore, why should you force the children to free this maidservant? They have a huge loss because they won't even be able to get any of her children. The father never said that she should become free. He just said, don't work her too hard. So they argued with Rab Dimi's rendition of what Rabbi Yochanan said. He also Rab Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rab Shmuel bar Yehuda said something else in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. This is what he said. This shivcha did me a great favor. I really, really have a lot of hakaras to her, and therefore, I want you to do something that's going to make her really happy. So the halacha is then kaifin is a yarshin v'oisin la kairas ruach. There you force the yarshim to do something that's going to make her happy. Well, what if she will settle for nothing less than freedom? The only thing that's going to make me happy is freedom. I don't care how many popsicles you buy me, I'm not going to cut it. I don't even care if you buy me jewelry. I want freedom. They'll have to free her. As Rashi says, since the command of their father, the instruction of their father was to make her happy, you're going to have to do whatever makes her happy, including freeing her if that's what it's going to take. My timer, mitzvah l'kaim divrei emes. So if the Adon said, Al Yishtab Duba, there everyone jumped and said that cannot mean a Lashon Shikhr. But Yasal L'Kais Ruach is a much more broad request of his children. That would include everything that it takes to make her happy, including freedom. Amar Ameimer. Ameimer said, so let me just see Rashi, because Rashi makes something clear. Rab Shmuel, Ella, Upalag ad Rab Dimi. So Shmuel is arguing with Rab Dimi about what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan didn't say Al Yishtabed Ba means to free her. Rabbi Yochanan said Yasal L'Kais Ruach would even include freeing her. Amar Ameimer. And mafkir avdoi, if someone is mafkir his eved, oisoy eved ein loy takon. This eved does not have a takon. So let's just refresh our memories what we learned up until this point, what the status of a mafker abdo is. According to Shmuel, we said a mafker abdo yotzal lecheres v'ein tzarich get shechur, because he learned from the pasuk of Eved Ish that unless the Eved is owned by somebody in its mominus, it doesn't have any status, even if Isra Beheter of an Eved. So being mafker Eved is enough. The Eved doesn't even need to get shechur. Then we had yesterday Shita Rabbi Yochanan, who holds a mafker abdo yotzal lecheres v'tzarich get shechur. So now we have a third opinion. There's no hope for this Eved at all. And Rashi adds, even at this point, a shtar shecher wouldn't work, and this Eved is stuck. Cannot marry a Jewish woman, cannot marry a guy. My timer, because Gufei loy kanile. There is no more kinyan to the owner who was mafker the Eved. All that remains is Isura hu de ikagabe. All there is that bond of Isra V'Heter. The Isura loy motze maknalei. And he can't give up the Isur because it's not his anymore. So in other words, he doesn't own her enough to give her a get, but a get is still needed. And therefore this Eved is without hope. Amalei Rav Ashi la Meimar. Rav Ashi told him Meimar, V'amar ula amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rab Chia bar Abin amar Rab, echad zeh, ve'echad zeh, yotzal lecheres, v'tzarech get shechur. Didn't we learn yesterday, and the day before, and even the day before that Rabbi Yochanan and the Rav both hold that you could give a get shechur just because you've discharged the monetary ownership you have in this Eved, but you still are able to discharge the bond of Isra V'Heter through a get shechur. Amalei, you know what they meant? They meant tzarech ve'ein lo takana. They never meant that you can actually give a get. They meant you need a get, but there's no hope. There's no way to give a get. So Tosfos asks a very obvious kasha. Tema, the Tikshileme Idich Rabbi Yochanan, the Amalil, we learned earlier in the Gemara, a quote from Rabbi Yochanan, that Evet Shebarach me Beis HaSurim, an Eved who runs away from the Beis HaSurim, so he's Hefker. Rabbi Yochanan says, V'lo oid ala koifin its rabbi. You force the other to give a get. Now that surely indicates that it will work. Alma yesh takana. So just the nusach that he said, V'tzarech et shechur, there you might argue he meant you need, but there's no way to do it. But Rabbi Yochanan said much more explicitly that actually giving the get shechur does work. So that's Tosfos' kasha on this Gemara. Ikad Amri, there was another version of how this story went down. Amar Ameimar, Hamafkir Abdoi Umeis, if someone is Mafkir his Eved and he dies, then Oisoya Eved Ein Latakan. If he's still alive, he still has enough of an ownership in this Eved that he can give the Eved a get shechur. But if he died before he had a chance to give a shtar shechur, now there's no takana. Why? My time, gufe loy kanile. There is no the yarshim and the father didn't own the guf because he was already mafkrid. Isura he the ikagabe. There's Isser left, Isser V'Heter, the part of the Abdus, that's Isser V'Heter that prohibits this Eved from marrying a Bas Yisrael is still there. V'Isura lebarei le'moiris. You know what you could yarshin to your child? Any monetary interest you have in something. But this bond of Isser V'Heter, you can't yarshin. And the proof is in the pudding, similar to what we learned yesterday. If someone is married to a woman, there's a bond of Isser V'Heter, and he dies, does that bond go to his children? Surely not. So Isser V'Heter, you don't yarshin. So therefore, you might have still had a connection enough to give him the get shechur while you were alive. But once the person who's mafker his Eved dies, the children no longer have an ownership stake in this Eved, so they cannot issue a get shechur. So now this Eved is stuck. Zok to Gemara, Amalei Rabashi la Meimar. Rabashi told the Meimar, how can you say that? Remember, Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if someone tells his children, we say, well, if he said al yishtabduba, didn't he mean to be mafker? And all that's remaining is a get shechur. And in fact, Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan said that they have to write her a get shechur. How could they write her a get shechur if she doesn't belong to them from a financial perspective? Didn't we just tell you that Rab Dimi is a mistake? Because the Gemara asked, he never asked them to be Meshachar her. To the contrary, he just meant that she should get a break. but her children will remain avadim. So don't bring me a raya from a Rab Dimi who is already debunked. Rab Dimi Ta'usi. Amalei Mai Ta'usa. Why is Rab Dimi a mistake? Dr. Gemara, Amr B'Lashon Shichra. Because the father never commanded his children to free her. That would be like being mafker her. The father just said, Al Yishtabdiba, don't make her work hard. But Ha'amr B'Lashon Shichra. What if he would have said it B'Lashon Shichra? Hachanami. So the whole reason why you debunked Rav Dimi is because of the words that we're quoting the Adon as having said. But everybody agrees, had the Adon told his children, I want you to free this woman, then everybody agrees that, in fact, that they would give her a get shecher. Back to Amemar, according to you, if he told them he wants them to free her, that's as if he is also being mafker her. And then, based on that Maimer, how could the children give her a get shecher after that if they could no longer do it? Because as the Gemara said, the financial interest is not there anymore. And the Isra v'Heter, the children will not yarshu. Amar lei, he answered, Maimer answered, Ano k'der Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda svirli. I owed like Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda, that Rabbi Yochanan never said such a thing at all. Rabbi Yochanan just said, if I told her to make a kayas ruach, to make a kayas ruach for her, then they would have to free her. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, Rabbi Yochanan never said such a thing. So then you don't have a raya that anyone can give a get shecher. And in fact, they would not be able to. Gewaltig. Zogt Rashi. Ein le takana. The Yisur Laban of Moirish. You can't be Moirish Isra v'Heter. V'hanami kizavnei. Oh no, that's weiter because it was sold. So let's go weiter. Zogt Gemara weiter. So what we had over here is a discussion whether or not if someone is mafker his eved and then he dies, do the children retain a stake in this eved enough to be able to issue a get shecher or not? Amemar said not. Others argue on it. Who diskarta the abdi? There was a city. It was like a little neighborhood that was full of avodim. The izdavin la'oiv dekachavim. The whole city, the whole group of avodim in one great lot was sold to goyim. So the issue is they can't buy the Isra v'Heter portion of a nevet. They can only buy the Ma'isidaim, the Choshe Mishvat, the monistic interest. Kalu marvasa basroi. And then the goyim who purchased these avodim all passed on. They all died. So now the question is, what status do these avodim have? Can they marry Jewish people? Because now there's no ownership on them. It's as if their adon was mafker them, but the problem is they haven't received a get shecher. Also, the Kamei de Ravina. They came to Ravina to ask about their plight. Amalu, he told them, Zilu ahadru abnei marvasa kamayu. Apparently, even the original owners had already passed away. So go find the next of kin of the original Jewish owners that sold you, v'yichtavu lechu Gittin de Cherusa, and ask them to write you a star shicher. Because that interest, the Isra v'Heter interest, was never sold by their father to the goyim, because goyim can't buy an Isra v'Heter. They could only buy monistic. As we learned earlier, goyim could only be kind of other goyim for Ma'isidaim. That is the financial interest, not the Isra v'Heter interest. So that remained by the father. When he died, it transferred over to the children. This is, you can see clearly, this is not like a Memar. Amr le Rabbanan le Ravina. So the Rabbanan asked Ravina, didn't Amemar say that since you cannot yarshin just an Isra v'Heter, there is no one who has the ability at this point to write this star shichra? Amalahu, Ravina says, Ana Rav Dimi svirli. I hold like Rav Dimi. And according to Rav Dimi, again, going back to the same thing, when a father told his children, don't be mishabed with the shivcha, that maybe when the father told the children not to be mishabed with the shivcha, the Rav Dimi quotes Rabbi Yochanan as saying that the children will have to give her a get. So you see that children could yarshin the Isra v'Heter portion to give a get. Amr lei, they're Rav Dimi ta'uzahi. But they told him, we've already debunked Rav Dimi that Rabbi Yochanan never said such a thing. Amar luhu, So Ravina answered back, that's not true. My ta'usa. The whole reason why you're saying that Rabbi Yochanan couldn't have said it is the Amr B'Lashon Shikr. Because the father didn't say be Mishacher. The father said don't work with it. But how Amr B'Lashon Shikr, we all agree that if the father told his children to be Mishacher my Elma, Hakanami, it would have worked. The Hilchas Ravina. So Allah Chalamai says, Dr. Murray, we don't pass like a Maimer. In fact, just the Isser V'Heter portion, if there's no financial portion, because the Adon was mafkirit, there's just a bond of Isser V'Heter that does pass on to the next generation, and therefore the next generation is able to write up a getshir. Beautiful. Who abda the Beitrei. There was an Eved who belonged to two partners. Kom chad minayu v'shacharei lepalgei. One partner freed his half. Amar idach. The other partner said, Hashda shami berabanan umafsed leminoi. We know that a half a Eved, half a ben chayrin. What is his status? The Rabbanim force the other shutef to free that Eved, and then the Eved writes an IOU note. I don't want to lose my Eved. I'm happy with the work that he does. I have no intention of freeing him, but the rabbis are going to force me, so I got to get around it. Also, akni levnoi katan. Right away, he was makne his interest in this Eved to his son who's a katan. Bezdin don't force minors to do anything. So now he's foolproof. He's outsmarted the Bezdin. The Bezdin can no longer take away this Eved from him. Shalach Rabbi Yosy buried the Rabbi l'kamed Rav Papa. Shalach they send him kasher also kein yasaloi gemuloi kasher also kein yasaloi. What he did to circumvent us, we're going to do right back to him. And gemula yashav b'roshei. We're going to turn this around on him, on his head, and he's going to pay. What are we going to do? Anon himlan b'yenuka the mekarber daite legabezuzi. We know this child likes shiny coins. He loves shiny coins. Rashi says, we'll see in a second where Rashi says, and therefore, mukaminiloi apotropos, let's appoint for him an apotropos, and we'll turn over, but we'll come back in a minute to do Rashi. Let's make an apotropos for this cotton, who could make sure to protect the affairs. Umekagish lezuze, then we'll dazzle this child, will shake shiny coins in front of him, and the child's going to want it. And therefore, if the child wants it, it's not forcing anymore, and we'll tell the child, you want these coins? Read your Eved. He'll say, sure, because the child doesn't understand. He's so excited with the coins. Because of Lagita, the Charus al Shmei, and then you can write, the apotropos with Bezin could write a shtar shikhr on behalf of the child, so that the Eved will go free. So they got it, they took care of business even without the father. So let's get into the details. What is the purpose of the apotropos? Let him just dazzle the coins, and then the child will be happy to free the Eved. Zok Rashi mekmin apotropos liyanuka livra loy domim yofin kama shunisham b'shul. If a zoivite, the Eved is responsible to write an IOU note for its full value. A child is not capable of determining that. So the apotropos does have to protect the child's interest and make sure that the Eved will accept upon himself that responsibility to pay. But in order to get the child to agree, do you just dazzle him with some coins? And the child doesn't think of the choiv that he's going to be given. That we do for him. We're just trying to get the child to be willing. Tiny little thing, but it's flashy. Therefore, we don't need bezin to force the child. The child is eager to free the Eved because he wants those coins. So without getting the child to be eager to do this, this transaction would be impossible to complete. The Yenuka Labark for you. You're never allowed to force a child. And why can't the apotropos do it on his behalf? Apotropos never have the authority to free an Eved if the child is not wanting to do that. He can't do anything that would damage the interest of the Yisraelim. But the Tinnik said, this child, this Tinnik who has an understanding that he wants this, for that, he understands the give and take, that's enough das, that when you're talking about metaltalin, it would be a valid sale. Those children who are somewhat understanding, so why do you have an apotropos? All the apotropos' job is to make sure that the IOU note that the Eved will write will be of the proper value to cover the value of the Eved. Someone said the following. He made the following statement, and he said as follows: and the Gemara, Rashi tells us, the Gemara could tell us in a minute, he didn't say this. He wrote this in the star that he handed to the Eved. And he either wrote the following: Asisi Ploini Avdi ben Chayrin, or he wrote Asu ben Chayrin, or he said Harei Hu ben Chayrin. All of these are good nuschoyes to write in the Shtar Shechur, Harei Hu ben Chayrin. That will have an impact. It will make him ben Chayrin. It works. But what if he said in the Shtar, Asenu ben Chayrin, I will make him a ben Chayrin. So not a Sisi, not a made in the past, rather I will in the future. Rabbi Omer Kana. Rabbi holds that as a good lashon of shechur. Chachamim Omerim loy kana. Rabbi holds it will work, and Chacham holds it won't work. And Rashi explains. Rabbi holds it works. The hachi mashma. What does it mean when he says I will make him a ben chayrin? It means asenu ben chayrin b'shechur zeh shani moishalei achshav. I am making him a free man with the transferring of the star to him right now. The Gemara is going to explain that all of these expressions were not oral; they were written on the star. The Chachamim are loikon. It doesn't work. If someone writes asenu ben chayrin, all it means is a commitment that eventually I will free you. But I don't mean that this document is what's freeing you. I'll provide you in the future with another star that is in fact a get shecher, but he hasn't done that yet. Rabbi Yochanan said this whole discussion is only if there was a star here. As Rashi says, Haya Oimer the Katani, these expressions that we just talked about as the Adon having said is really kaisavu. It means he said it through the writing of the star. If all that happened was the Adon just said those words, that for sure wouldn't work. Not only wouldn't it work for the Isser V'Heter portion, it wouldn't even be considered being mafker the Eved. It wouldn't work at all. And therefore, Umati L'Mahader Bey, the Adon would be able to say, you're working for me, I haven't freed you. Unless a kinyan was made, like a kinyan chalipin, so the Eved gave the Adon something to lift up, maybe that would at least create a momentistic kinyan. But this does nothing at all. By chalipin, it would be similar to kesef, like the story with the hat. Or if it was a shivmara, it would work mishum de dvarav keksuv mechzurim. But a regular person merely saying those words accomplishes nothing. So this is exactly the same Gemara repeated, but not with an Eved, with a field. Someone writes in the star, Nasati Yisada Ploinis Ploini. I gave somebody this field. Or Nesuna Ploini, it should be given to Ploini. Harei Hishaloi, or it's his. Allah is Harei Hishaloi. This is a good lashon of giving a star to be makne a field. What if he says Nena Ploini, meaning in the future? Rabbi Omer, the Bach changes the gear. So Rabbi Omer, Kana, Loy Kana. Again, this is a repeat of what we just learned by Avodim. It applies to stars as well because it's merely analyzing what is the intention, what these words mean. What if the Adon says, I made my Eved ben Chayrin? I don't think this is Bishtar. He made a declaration. I freed my Eved. I freed my Eved. And you go to the Eved, and the Eved says, no. The Eved says, that's not true. It's not true. He never freed me. There you're choshit that just because the Eved doesn't know that the Adon freed him, could be the Adon freed the Eved without even the Eved knowing about it. Maybe he didn't give the Eved a star shikhr. Maybe he gave it to somebody else to be kind on behalf of the Eved, and Zachin L'Adam Shloi B'Fanav. Becoming free is a schus. It's an absolute schus. And therefore, the Eved might be free and not even know about it. But what if he writes, what if he says, Kasavti v'nasati loy? I actually wrote a shtar shikhr and I handed it directly to the Eved. But whoever the Eved denies it and says loy kasav li, loy nasan li. So the halacha is haidas baldin kemeya edim dami. There we trust the Eved because the Eved is admitting that in fact he's not free, and therefore he remains mishubad. As Rashi says, haidas baldin Eved. We trust the Eved. The same thing would happen if it was any matana. Even the Amar like Kibalti Neman. The Makabal who says I didn't get it, that Hidas Baldin, I'm admitting that I don't have something that you might be attributing to me. And therefore, and therefore, the giver of the matana or the giver of the shtar shikhr couldn't change his mind. The Armenian will say, he said he gave it. Maybe ta. When he gave it over, he thought the recipient was Makabal, but in fact, he wasn't. Exactly the same case as Eved, but a parallel case by Sada. Who amar loy nasanli chayshinon shemazika loy aldeyache. But kasavti v'nasateloi who oimer loy kasav v'loy nasanli. There haidas baldin kamei edim dam. Right now, this field is in limbo because the recipient says it doesn't belong to me, and the giver says I gave it away. So who's going to get the pairs of this field? Rabbi Chisda Amar Noisen Eichel pairs. The original owner of the field, the giver gets the pairs. We say the chazak is that it remained in his status, in his possession. Rabbi Amar Mishalshal Nasa pairs. No, it's a subject who this pairs belong to. We don't know who this field belongs to. You give it to a third party who's responsible, who's trusted, and he holds on to it until you can verify what happened. But it's not a machloikis. Haba abba haba bara. If the father's still alive, Zok Rashi, if the Mekabel is alive, the Omar and the Mekabel said, Loi nosan li. I never got this field. He never gave it to me. Then the Mekabel Matana is Nemon, and therefore Oichel am Noishin is a payers. Then the giver keeps the payers because the recipient is denying it. But what if the recipient isn't around and his children are around and they say, we have no knowledge of ever receiving this gift. We have no knowledge that our father ever received this gift. The children say, we have no record of our father ever receiving this as a gift. Then, mishalshim. Then we give it to a third party because the Shema Yavo Edim Shemachal Aviv Vizeloyota. Maybe there will be Edim that show up one day and say that this field, in fact, did belong to the recipient. It's just that nobody knew about that yet. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll be Mamshech Bez Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. Need a good title for today's shir.